Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to Storytime. Today we continue in Max Lucado's Tell Me the Secrets, Treasures for Eternity. If you remember last week during Storytime, we learned about the secret of peace. Eric, one of the characters, did not have peace. He didn't understand how he could stand up and say that he believed in God and that his teacher and every student in the class would ridicule and mock him. They laughed at him. He felt like God let him down. And that is when Grandpa Josh told Eric all about Ezrod the mouse. Do you remember his little pet mouse in the glass cage that he lived in? Ezrod was misinterpreting what he could see and what he couldn't see. He didn't understand that there is so much more to the world than that container he lived in, than that room he lived in. God's world is so much bigger than ours. His point of view is so much greater than what we see. He can see things, all things, even the things we don't, the things that we don't see and the things that we don't understand. We are to keep our eyes and minds fixed on the Lord, what we cannot see, rather than what we can see. And this week, we will get to learn about the secret of victory. We have the secret of peace, which was last week, learning to trust and have peace. This week, we are going to learn how to have victory. Let's begin our story. The secret of victory. Be alert. Continue strong in the faith. Have courage and be strong. 1 Corinthians 16:13. The trip was every bit as bad as Landon feared it would be. His cousin was a troublemaker. Do you know any of those? Every time Landon was with him, he got into trouble. He has a way of making me do bad things, he explained to Josh before the trip. Like last year, he sneaked into an X-rated movie theater. I didn't want to go, but I knew if I didn't, I'd feel like a geek. So I went. Sounds like he's a bad influence on you, Josh replied. Sometimes it feels like he's more than a bad influence. It feels like he has control of me. Josh went into his study and returned with the Book of Secrets. He removed the key from around his neck and gave it and the book to Landon. When temptation comes, get off by yourself and read the story entitled The Song of the King. It will give you strength. The temptation came sooner than Landon expected. Even as their parents were greeting each other in the front yard, his cousin leaned over and whispered, "We're gonna party tonight." Now, let's look at our picture of victory. Here is a person with a shield, a sword, and the Holy Bible. Let's see what Landon does when he's faced with this temptation to party. Later, when the two were alone, he told Landon, after the folks are in bed, we'll sneak out. I know a girl whose folks are out of town. Everyone will be there. Landon tried to think of an excuse, but he couldn't. All evening, he dreaded the encounter. He didn't know what to do. Then he remembered the Book of Secrets. He told everyone good night, nodded as his cousin winked, and went into the guest room. Tell me what to do, Lord, he prayed as he sat on the bed and unlocked the book. He found the chapter and started to read the story of the king. The Song of the King. The three knights sat at the table and listened as the prince spoke. My father the king has pledged the hand of my sister to the first of you who can prove himself worthy. The prince paused to let the men take in the news. He looked at their faces, each weathered from miles and scarred from battles. The kingdom knew no stronger warriors than these three, and these three soldiers knew of no fairer maiden than the daughter of the king. Each knight had asked the king for her hand. The king had promised only an opportunity, a test, to see which was worthy of his daughter. And now the time for the test had arrived. "Your test is a journey," the prince exclaimed. "A journey to the king's castle by way of Hemlock." "The forest?" one knight quickly inquired. "The forest," answered the prince. There was silence as the knights pondered the words. Each felt a stab of fear. They knew the danger of Hemlock, a dark and deadly place. Parts of it were so thick with trees that the sunlight never found the floor. It was the home of the hope-knots, small, sly creatures with yellow eyes. Hope-knots were not strong, but they were clever, and they were many. Some people believed the hope-knots were lost travelers changed by the darkness, but no one really knew for sure. "Will we travel alone?" Carlyle spoke, a strange question to come from the strongest of the three knights. His fierce sword was known throughout the kingdom, but even this steely soldier knew better than to travel Hemlock unaccompanied. "You may each select one companion." "But the forest is dark. The trees make the sky black. How will we find the castle?" This time it was Alon who spoke. He was not as strong as Carlyle, but much quicker. He was famous for his speed. Alon left trails of baffled enemies whose grasp he'd escaped by ducking into trees or scampering over the walls. But swiftness is worthless if you have no direction. So Alon asked, "How can we find the way?" The prince nodded, reached into his sack, and pulled out an ivory flute. "There are only two of these," he explained. "This one and another in the possession of the king." He put the instrument to his lips and played a soft, sweet aria. Never had the knights heard such soothing music. "My father's flute plays the same song. His song will guide you to the castle." "How is that?" Alon asked. 3 times a day the king will play from the castle wall, when the sun rises, when the sun peaks, and when the sun sets. Listen for him. Follow his song, and you will find the castle." "There is only one other flute like this one?" "Only one." "And you and your father play the same music?" "Yes." It was Cassidon inquiring. Cassidon was known for his alertness. He saw what others missed. He knew the home of a traveler by the dirt on his boot. He knew the truth of a story by the eyes of the teller. He could tell the size of a marching army by the number of scattered birds in flight. Carlyle and Alon wondered why he asked about the flute. It wouldn't be very long before they found out. "Consider the danger and choose your companion carefully," the prince cautioned, and so they did. The next morning the 3 knights mounted their horses and entered Hemlock. Behind each rode the chosen companion. The knock at the door startled Landon. He looked up from the book to see his cousin in the doorway. "Everybody is going to bed," he whispered. "I'll be back in a few minutes." And then, loud enough for everyone to hear, he said, "Night, Landon. See you in the morning." Landon groaned. "These knights aren't the only travelers in a dangerous forest," he muttered to himself, as he turned his attention back to the book. For the people in the king's castle, the days of waiting passed slowly. All knew of the test, and all wondered which knight would win the princess. 3 times a day the king sent the music soaring into the trees of Hemlock, and 3 times a day the people stopped their work to listen. After many days and countless songs, a watchman spotted 2 figures stumbling out of the forest into the clearing. No one could tell who they were. They were too far from the castle. The men had no horses, weapons, or armor. "Hurry," commanded the king to his guards. "Bring them in. Give them medical attention and food. But don't tell anyone who they are. Dress the knight as a prince, and we will see their faces tonight at the banquet." He then dismissed the crowds and told them to prepare for the feast. That evening, a festive spirit filled the banquet hall. At every table, the people tried to guess which knight had survived Hemlock Forest. Finally, the moment came to present the victor. At the king's signal, the people became quiet, and he began to play the flute. Once again, the ivory instrument sang. The people turned to see who would enter. Many thought it would be Carlyle, the strongest. Others felt it would be Alon, the swiftest. But it was neither. The knight who survived the journey was Cassidon, the wisest. He strode quickly across the floor, following the sound of the flute one final time and bowing before the king. "Tell us of your journey," he was instructed. The people leaned forward to listen. "The Hope-Knots were treacherous," Cassidon began. "They attacked, but we resisted. They took our horses, but we continued. What nearly destroyed us, though, was something far worse." "What was that?" asked the princess. "They imitated." "They imitated?" asked the king. "Yes, my king, they imitated. Each time the song of your flute would enter the forest, 100 flutes would begin to play. All around us we heard music, songs from every direction. I do not know what became of Carlyle and Alon," he continued, "but I know strength and speed will not help one hear the right flute." The king asked the question that was on everyone's lips. "Then how did you hear my song?" "I chose the right companion," he answered, as he motioned for his fellow traveler to enter. The people gasped. It was the prince. In his hand, he carried the flute. "I knew there was only one who could play the song as you do," Cassidon explained. "So I asked him to travel with me. As we journeyed, he played. I learned your song so well that though 1,000 false flutes tried to hide your music, I could still hear you. I knew your song and followed it." As Landon closed the book, a note fell out. He picked it up. "Follow the song of the king, Landon. Love, Josh." "Yeah, Josh, that's what I will do," Landon resolved aloud. "That's what I will do." Minutes later, his cousin's face peeked through the crack of the door. "Come on, Landon, let's get out of here." "I've decided not to go." "What? Come on, don't be a nerd. Let's go have some fun." "No thanks." Landon's voice was steady. "I'm staying home." And then with a smile, he added, "I've got some music to listen to." Victory. The Christian life can be likened to walking up an incline. Jesus called it the narrow road. Along the way are many opportunities and temptations to stop, or at least to become distracted. Our potent, that means powerful enemy, Satan, has littered our path with every stupid, pleasurable, and deadly thing at his disposal. Too often we fall for the apple he offers. We think it's just kid stuff or exploring what's out there. But Eve found out that it's much better to avoid getting ensnared than to try to get out of the trap. Many of us as adults have learned this same hard lesson. But there's a secret here that might help. It's called discernment. If we could quickly recognize sin for what it is and not be fooled by the packaging, we could resist it every time. If you knew that the beautiful candy-coated apple was really poison, you wouldn't think of biting into it. I have discovered an encouraging truth. The lure of something gets weaker the longer I resist it. Sure, at first it seems almost overwhelming, as if there is no way to refuse it. But that perception is only an illusion. Temptation is going to come to you through an enticing picture in a magazine or through a friend. It will not look like poison, but it is. Everything inside you will scream, "Go ahead and take a small bite." But don't. The secret to staying on the road is making the decision to resist long before the offer comes. Be sober-minded. Be watchful. For your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. Resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. 1 Peter 5:8 and 9. Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. James 4:7. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand firm. Ephesians 6:11 through 13. This week, we learned about the secret of victory. We have victory when we choose to resist temptation and submit to the Lord. And as we submit to the Lord, it might be hard, but the more we do it, the better we'll get.